let me tell you how great it is to see this wonderful crowd. You guys are the best. I can't believe I should have been coming to Vero Beach every year. What I'm going to do is take you through a little journey of my adventures in television, starting way back in the first grade, and there's a reason I'll do that. And then I'm gonna talk a little bit about my novel writing and why I became a novelist, and then we'll talk about On the Grind, and then I'm open for any questions that you guys have about anything. You know, if there are any writers here, I love to answer writer questions. Anything that you know, you'd like to ask me about my old TV shows. Is Mr. T a good guy? Which he is, by the way. You know, I'm up for all of it. Okay, my story starts in the first grade, when I flunked that grade. Now, it's pretty hard to flunk the first grade. You know, we weren't doing anything, and it was just way before Sesame Street, so there was no reading. Nobody could read in the first grade. You know, but I wasn't apparently up to it. You know, and so you know, they held me back. Well, you know, when you flunk the first grade, people can say to you, there are reasons. You know, maybe Stephen's a little immature. Maybe, you know, maybe he's pulling somebody's hair. You know, okay, we'll hold him back, and that's okay. So it was acceptable to flunk the first grade. I then flunked the fourth grade. And nobody said to me that I was stupid. I didn't get that from my parents, obviously, who were really supportive and loving. And I didn't get it from teachers. I self-diagnosed myself as stupid because I have dyslexia. And I had no understanding of that. Back when I was going to school, there was no such thing as dyslexia. It hadn't been isolated as a condition. So, you know, I was basically dealing over and over and over again with this idea that I wasn't applying myself when I was. Now, I did have early evidences that I might have some talent as a writer. And the first time that happened, I remember when I was a sophomore in high school. And our English teacher asked the class to write a poem about a current event. And I chose Martin Luther King's attempt to desegregate the schools in the South. And I wrote my poem in iambic pentameter. It was about 7 verses. Very cool poem. Handed it in, and I got a B-. Now, for me, that was like a huge score, because when I was smoking, I would get a C, you know. Generally, it was D's and F's, so B- was like major for me, and I remember looking at that B- and thinking, oh my God, a B-, you know. So I go home, and I wait for my sister to come home. She was a senior at a very, very high-toned private school. I live in Pasadena, California, and it was a really great private school that she went to that I couldn't get into. And she was a senior, so she was 2 years ahead of me. She comes home, and I read her the Martin Luther King poem, and she really liked it. And I wait for my mom to come home, and when she gets home, I read her the Martin Luther King poem. My dad gets home, I read it to him at dinner. I shut them all up. I stood, and I sort of performed the Martin Luther King poem. At breakfast the next morning, I read the Martin Luther King poem. And my dad said, enough with this thing. But I was so proud because I got a B-. About 2 months later, my sister comes to me and she says, you remember your Martin Luther King poem? And I go, yes. She said, well, give it to me. I go, why? She goes, well, I have to write a poem for my senior English project. And I'm not very good at poems. That was a pretty good poem, so let me have it. And I said, well, you know, Lynn, I only got a B- on it. She was like an A student at this private school. And she said, I don't care, give me the poem. So you don't say no to your big sister, so I gave her the poem, and she hands it in, and she gets an A. And they published it in her school literary magazine. My father said to me when I was very young, he said, if a man or a woman makes 3 correct choices on important things in their life, they will be successful. And at the time that sounded like so simplistic that it was not even worth contemplating. But my dad was the smartest guy I ever knew, and so let's look at my life. Number one, the first important decision that I made was to walk away from my inheritance and become a writer. The second important decision that I made was to walk away from a huge deal at Universal and take a major gamble and set up an independent production company studio. And then the third important decision in my life was to become a novelist. So he was right, as he always was. This is my 14th book. This book, On the Grind, is about a corrupt police department down in the inner city of LA. In Los Angeles, we have all these little incorporated cities that grew up around the edges of LA, and then LA continued to grow and kind of envelop them, and they became our inner city. Everybody has heard of Compton because rap music started in Compton. That's one of them. Compton, Bell Gardens, Maywood, Cudahy, City of Industry. They're all these little, they're about a square mile, they're little tiny chunks of land, and they have their own police departments, and they have their own municipal governments, and their own courthouses, and district attorneys, and all that stuff. And I decided that I would create the fictitious city of Haven Park, and that it would have the most corrupt police department and city government in the world. That this would be like a third world country, that would be run by a corrupt Hispanic mayor, American-born Hispanic mayor, who believes that he is a very important figure in the lives of the Hispanic people that live in this town. He's actually ripping them off every way that he possibly can. They're all, for the most part, undocumented, which is the case with a lot of these people that live in these little communities in the inner city. So they have nowhere to turn because they're afraid to go to the police, and the police are ripping them off anyway, looting their cars, selling them back to them for $200, closing their restaurants, closing their businesses with fire codes, selling the open door back to them for $1,000 or $1,500 a month. You know, it's all protection. It's all. Plus, we have a very violent gang in Southern California called the 18th Street Gang, and they are responsible for bringing a lot of drugs and the new 100 series AK Kalashnikov 100 series rifles out of fully automatic rifles out of Russia. They're the upgraded AK-47s. Homeland is very worried about that because if they get into the hands of terrorists, they're a devastating weapon. And Shane Scully, my character, who's been in now 8 books, is his 8th story that I've told about him. Goes undercover in this department, ends up putting on a blue suit again. He's got the shoulder rover on his shoulder. He's being trained by the most corrupt guy police officer in America. This guy's name is Alonzo Bell. He's a sergeant. And when I have a Hispanic heavy, like I have in this novel, The Mayor, I always like to have a Hispanic hero. My Hispanic hero in this book is a guy named Rocky Chacon. He was an immigrant that came across the border to pick fruit, ended up getting his citizenship in Reagan's Amnesty Act of '81, became a middleweight fighter, and for about 6 seconds held the middleweight crown. And so all these Hispanics that live, he's like Roberto Duran, all these Hispanics in this town love him because he has ganas, because he's like, they call him El Obrador, which means the brawler, and he is you know, a major hero to them, and he owns a restaurant with his mother in this little town. Quite a ladies' man too, and he decides to run for the mayor of this town and overthrow this government. He's the only guy in this city that, because of his popularity as the next middleweight champion, could actually win it. And in so doing, puts a target on his chest. And Shane is uniquely positioned to help him do what he wants to do and to save his life. And these two kind of become a team in this corrupt, you know, bubbling cauldron called Haven Park. So that's On the Grind, by the way, the title of the book. That stands for Your Grind is Your Hustle. You know, if I was working in this bookstore, this would be my grind. If you're selling drugs, you know, somewhere on a street corner, that street corner would be your grind. And then this novel, the whole city of Haven Park, is the grind of the Haven Park Police Department. So that's what this is about. If you have any questions about any of this, I know I've gone on a little longer than probably I should, but with such a large crowd, I was just...